Hello, everyone. I'm Debbie Cottrell, and I have the great honor of serving as president of Texas Lutheran University. And today we are inaugurating a new conversation series that I'm hosting that's called All Are Welcome. The purpose of this series is to allow me to connect with and hear from and then share the insights of TLU alums and current TLU community members, local community members, and others as we think about racial justice, about this time in our world, and about how we can all learn and grow during this time. I'm delighted to begin this conversation series by featuring 4 TLU alums in what I see as a discussion focused on learning from our own. My guests today represent a distinguished group of TLU graduates, each of them either individuals who have reached out to me in recent months or who were recommended to me for further conversations by our regent and TLU alum, Demetrius Hardiman. And I know we all give a shout out to Demetrius, our good friend and leader today. So briefly, to introduce my guests today, we have Nick Hayes, who is a class of 2008, and Nick was a communication studies major here at TLU. Chawanna Chambers, class of 2007, who studied multidisciplinary studies. Anthony Guillory, class of 2007, a theology major, and Stephanie Womack, class of 2004, who studied history and African American studies here. So again, a welcome to each of you, and thank you for joining me today. I'd like to start today's conversation by letting each of you talk a little bit first about your own personal background, a little bit more about who you are. Where did you grow up, and how did you get to TLU? And how about Chawanna, you want to get started first?
Sure. My name is Dr. Chawanna Chambers. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, on the southeast side. I got to TLU because my childhood best friend, Jennifer Sanders, asked me my senior year if I would just go to TLU with her. So I said, okay. And so I applied to TLU, and then we came here together and were roommates my freshman year. But I grew up in San Antonio, graduated in Florida because my mother was married my stepdad, who was in the Air Force. So I did my last 3 years in Florida and then came back to Texas, where I've been for a little bit, traveled the world, and then came back.
All right, great. Thank you. How about you, Anthony?
I was born in Houston, but then my family moved to the Dallas area, and then to Austin, and then back to Houston. And then 2 months shy of graduation, we moved back to the Dallas area. The reason for those moves is that we were poor, and we were often getting evicted and having to relocate to live with family and so forth. I was recruited by a football coach when I was still in Houston to go to TLU. And I relied heavily on my mom's wisdom, and she advised, and the way she put it was, you need to go to school to learn how to deal with white people. And so she recommended that I go to TLU. Yeah, that's how I ended up there.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie?
I'm Stephanie Womack, and I was an Army child, not a brat. My brothers and I were great, but we lived all over, started in North Carolina, traveled around, lived in Europe, ended up in San Antonio. And what I realize now, and having helped other kids go through the college selection process, is that I did not decide to go to college. I was just asked one day, are you going to college? And I was like, sure. And I got a flyer in the mail for TLU, and my friend and I took the 30-minute road trip up 10 to visit campus, and I fell in love and applied and got in, and that was it.
That's great. And Nick?
Yes, my name is Nick Hayes. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, and my parents were 18 when they had me, and so I bounced around a lot. I eventually ended up in Texas, which is where my adoptive father lived, and went to middle school and high school in New Braunfels, right down the road from TLU. So I guess I just heard about TLU because of proximity.
All right, great. You all have different ways of having arrived at TLU. It's always fun to hear those stories. I'm also really interested to hear, knowing that how you found us, a little bit more about your experiences as TLU students. I'd like to know from each of you what your priorities were as a student. I mean, I'm sure you're all going to tell me that it was to study all the time, but maybe beyond that, what your priorities were as a student. What did you find the most challenging about being in the environment here at TLU, and what were some of your favorite things? And anything else you would talk about from your TLU experiences. What can you share about that? And I'll let y'all go in whatever order you want.
I'll start. My priorities when I was at TLU, I was in the choir. So I sang in the Chawanna Chamber choir, the mixed choir, and then the women's choir. I was a private voice student when I was at TLU. And then I also was a student ambassador. So I was like all over the place. So my priorities, I say, would just be being involved, being busy. I worked multiple jobs while I was at TLU because I was a first generation college student. And did not have assistance. So I worked a lot. I spent a lot of time working and was taking like 16 to 18 hours every semester. But what I think what I loved the most about TLU were the people that I met, and being able to be involved in a lot of different areas. I would say what I do now today is a direct reflection of the type of opportunities and exposure that I was able to get when I was a TLU student, and learning how to talk to different types of people, different types of tasks. I work in the help desk department when I was at TLU, and now I designed the virtual learning program for a charter network here in San Antonio. So I think a lot of the things that I do now, I have to give credit to TLU for helping me build those foundational things. But yeah, choir was my favorite thing to do. I loved it so much. I also really appreciated the education department as a whole. When I was there at TLU, Dr. Kostelnik was a wonderful advisor who did some really phenomenal things for me personally, and is actually one of the reasons I finished at TLU. So yeah, it was great being involved in lots of different things, being able to be a guide dog and student ambassador. All of those things really just helped me become a much better adult as I grew up.
Were there challenges?
Oh yes, challenges. So I would say the biggest challenge, I think, was that I always felt like the Black student population was an afterthought for TLU, or not even a thought for TLU truly. And that sometimes they wanted to have us involved, but didn't really know how to connect with us as students. And so they would have their token Black students that they would talk to, hey, how can we do this? Or how can we bring more Black students to the campus? And how can we blah, 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 blah. So I think that was a challenge. And then also just the unspoken culture at TLU, some of the experiences we had with the baseball team and parties with different sororities and things like that, just sometimes microaggressions, but oftentimes just very blatant racist things. I think that is what dampers my history and my experiences at TLU. But outside of those things, I don't have a lot of negative things to say about TLU. I think that would just be it. The not the real commitment to having being involved with us as a group, but then also a lot of the students, at least when I was there, and their willingness to be overtly racist towards us while telling us that it was us and not them. So.
I'll go next to kind of elaborate a little or add my 2 cents into what Shay said about the Black population being kind of an afterthought. I'm biracial, and it was growing up on a military base. you don't recognize when you are biracial. Nobody asks you like, oh, your mom's white, or, you know, do you have a white family? Those kinds of things. And I had never felt the need to, you know, figure out my Blackness or anything like that. But being on the TLU campus, and I apologize if you hear cat meowing or see a tail. My cat is in my lap at the moment. She's like a child. But when I got to the TLU campus, I think because of the lack of a very large Black population, I gravitated towards them. And that's what I spent the majority of my time at TLU learning was, who am I as a biracial person, as a Black person? Do I identify as Black and white or just Black, you know, figuring those kinds of things out. And so I spent my time with the Black Student Union, eventually becoming the president, serving different functions. I also worked with the Mexican American Student Association. At one point, I don't know if it's still there, but at one point there was a call center for calling minority students to discuss TLU. And I was recruited as one of those people to help out with that. So that's really what I did. And I will agree with Chawanna that there were some overt things that happened, as well as some microaggressions. But being that we were so small, I don't know if we didn't think that we could do anything, but I don't even think there was an avenue to do anything. It was just really us discussing amongst ourselves. And I think when I was there from 2000 to 2004, there was 20 or 30 Black people. So once something happened, everybody knew what happened, and you knew who to avoid and, you know, what parties not to go to, those kinds of things. So that was a big thing for me on TLU campus was, you know, just the Black population and figuring out how I fit within them as a person.
Anthony, go ahead.
Okay. When I was from first generation college. When I got to TLU, and especially when we did our breakout groups during orientation, and we met with our GEC 134 group. I also had Dr. Kostelnik, as she exposed us early to all these philosophical texts, and and it was all these different examples, a way in which we should stretch our mind, and there was this element of vocation, and I fell in love with that because I had never been engaged in that way. I had never been engaged primarily as a thinker. Like I said, I was recruited to play football. I was on campus a few weeks before everyone else got there because we had practice, and it showed because I was very, very dark-skinned from being in the heat. And so people kind of knew, like, oh, you're on the football team. And it was kind of hard to read that because, like Chawanna and Stephanie said, there weren't that many African-Americans at all, and there certainly weren't that many African-American men. So I didn't know if that was an insult or like if they were like, hey, bro, you're a jock. Prior to my arrival, I spoke to a longtime friend who was going to an HBCU, and she and I never had much of a discussion about this. But she told me that she did not want to go to what she called a white school because it was not set up for her to be successful. And so going into TLU, I had this, in conjunction with what my mom is saying, I need to learn, learn how to deal with white people. I'm looking at this, this space, and, I'm kind of looking at it anthropologically, like, okay, what is it about this white school that's so impressive? And like I said, I love GEC 134. I love Dr. Kostelnik. And that was my introduction to the academic aspect of TLU. But it didn't take long to find out there weren't any Black faculty. And it didn't take long to find out that, the majority of the Black people who worked on the campus worked in the kitchen. And when I got there, there was one Black person with a doctorate, and he was from Tanzania, and he worked in the library's basement. which was odd because I had never even seen a basement before I got to TLU. And the only reason why I know he was down there is because I was often looking for a quiet place to study, and very few other people were there. Needless to say, me and Dr. Shaw got real close. But I remember asking some faculty over in Langner Hall about, like, why aren't there any Black faculty here? And, I remember having conversations with some administrators, and I was told at the time that we didn't have much Black faculty representation because African Americans with advanced degrees were so highly sought on the market that they simply priced themselves out of being recruited by TLU. And so this was around the time I was 19. So this is freshman year, second semester. And I said, okay, well, if that's all it is, I was like, whatever y'all get paid is more than what I grew up making. So I'll come back and work here. And so that's when I decided to become a professor. Like Chawanna, I was involved in so many different activities there at TLU that helped to position me as an attractive applicant for graduate school. And that was my primary focus. I wanted to make really good grades. I wanted to demonstrate that I was involved in many different initiatives. I wanted the opportunity to express, to think about and then be able to demonstrate, that I was a serious scholar and that I was interested in social issues. I was not a member of the Black Student Union. As a matter of fact, I'm probably the only person in history of that school that wrote a letter of resignation from the Black Student Union. And the reason why is because we get there and we're all coming from very different spaces, right? So there's some folks coming in from Randolph, there's some folks coming in from San Antonio, there's folks coming in from Houston, Austin, right? And one thing you see that's a huge disparity or divergence, right, is that, those who recruited to play sports had a very, very different route to TLU than those that didn't. And that was jarring. But then I come from a very segregated space. And so being in this integrated or desegregated space with several people who also come from desegregated spaces, right, without anything to process the difference in our experiences, that was jarring also. I didn't party much. To speak to Chawanna's point about some of these things that we could perceive as microaggressions, like the one Black fraternity on campus did some type of dating auction with a white sorority, and that pissed me off to no end. I thought that was so crude and ridiculous. I didn't know how anybody would think that that was a good idea. But what I found out was that many of the people there who identify as African or African American, they didn't major in things like history. And so conversations that we could use to contextualize our experience, right, were usually void of those types of contributions. And so that was kind of jarring as well. But I agree with Chawanna in that the reason why I am Dr. Guillory today is because I went to TLU, because I had this specific experience of seeing all these different things at this predominantly white institution, but also being taught or told in the background that this is something that I should aspire to. I am particularly sensitive to not just diversity and not just inclusion, but also anti-racism. That was something that bothered me about TLU. I think that many of the white liberal perspectives at TLU were working really, really hard to be tolerant of our Black students. There were some people who championed diversity as it was, and they constructed their ideas about, oh, look at how these Black students, these Latino students make our school better. But there was very little conversation about what we were doing as an institution to serve these Black and Latino students, not only while they were there on the yard, but actually once they hopefully matriculated and then graduated. And then the notion of anti-racist education, it certainly wasn't mainstream, but it certainly wasn't practiced in any real sense across the board. There were a few people who were doing it, Dr. Kostelnik being one of them, Dr. Beck being one of them, an adjunct professor at the time, Catherine Walters, was doing it. And so, you know, I relied heavily on those faculty for my mentorship. And they all urged me to go in this direction as well. And, you know, in many, many ways, yeah, I owe my survival at TLU to those individuals. Mm-hmm.
So for me, Anthony and I go way back. We were at TLU at the same time, and I actually took over as TLU OPED editor after he stopped doing it. And so learning from our own, I've been learning from Anthony for a very long time, and I always appreciated our conversations at TLU. So I very much consider myself obviously on the learning end of this conversation. Well, basically what I do now is I've lived in Korea for the last 12 years. And the reason I'm here is because of TLU. I walked into Charlotte Bailey's office one day and inquired about study abroad. She hooked me up with a study abroad situation in London, and I got the travel bug. And so after I graduated, I was like, okay, Europe was cool, Asia is next. And I was planning to stay out here just for 1 year, and that's turned into 12. So I've liked it. And I'm an English professor out here at a place called Sungkyunkwan University. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for TLU and and the faculty I met there that inspired me. You know, your Dr. Vrumans and Dr. Bollinger and Dr. Bish, you know, the list goes on. You know, basically what I saw from them was this like optimism and creativity and belief, you know, in what they were doing, and the power of education to change people. And I think, you know, a lot of our problems just comes back to education. And you know, racism is learned. Anti-racism can be learned as well. You know, Anthony mentioned anti-racism earlier. And so that's why I'm just really passionate about education. And I'm also passionate about TLU because it's that community that made me who I am today. And I just want everybody who goes there to be able to experience, you know, what I was able to experience regardless of their background or like obviously the color of their skin.
So I want to, you all anticipated a question I was going to ask about who on our campus had a particular impact on you. And I think all of you named someone, a faculty or staff member. So I want to just shift a little bit and maybe follow up on something that Anthony said, which I think is something that is familiar to me, the sense that student-wise, our campus is quite diverse. And I think I've said in the time I've been here that we reflect our region and we reflect this state, and we are diverse that way. But Anthony, you made the point that that reality has not always then led to, and so how do we serve these students in the best way possible? We're proud of that diversity. We talk about it. But how do we then make sure that that is a full circle of supporting students with around issues of diversity and inclusion and equity and anti-racism? I wonder, would anyone have more to say about that? I mean, I think that's a really important point that we're still sorting through and learning about. So I would be open to hearing more, maybe what you didn't see that you wish you had seen, or what you saw that you wish you hadn't, or how you've reflected on that particular issue maybe since leaving TLU.
So I think for me, I'm super committed, right, to anti-racism in education, mostly because I teach or I teach, I develop academic programs in a public school setting, right? So I need to make sure that when I'm adopting curriculum or we're creating curriculum that is anti-racist, right? And that makes sure that we are not teaching history and all of these things from a Eurocentric perspective. And so my experience at TLU, like though we had Profe and we had all of these different professors and folks that were committed to anti-racism, I think as an institution, TLU was very much not that far on the continuum in so to speak. You have individuals like at the time had individuals who were doing things to teach us and to plant seeds in us so that when we went off into the world, we would learn these things and choose to be different. But as an institution, it was very traditional. And I find that reflective on the Facebook comments, right? When TLU made their post about Black Lives Matter, the types of comments that were on the post from current students, from alumni, and from people who give money, right? So I think whenever we have this conversation and we talk about how do you best serve students like us and students who were coming from a very different background, and now we're in TLU surrounded by people who don't really see us when they're at home or probably have never sat at a dinner table and eaten with one of us. I think the elephant in the room is, as an institution, is that something you're committed to doing? Because that might mean someone who gives a lot of money may not want to give that money anymore, or someone who has always supported the institution in this way might send a letter to the president about why that's not okay. And that's not, this is not the institution that I know and that I love. And so that's always how I've always seen it, is like, I don't know that TLU was ever ready to take that step. Like, it was individuals who would do things, but I don't know that as an institution, folks were ready to take a step out there, because you have to be 10 toes forward. And that means you might have some alum who aren't as proud of TLU anymore, right? Because what you're saying now doesn't reflect what they believe, right? Like, I could say Black Lives Matter on a TLU post, and I promise you, I will get tons of alumni and current students and benefactors who want to yell me down, right, about All Lives Matter, and who want to yell me down about how, I actually had one of a TLU alum's mother tell me, well, you went to college at TLU, how can you afford da-da-da-da-da? Like, because I was at TLU and I was Black. And so you can't possibly have experienced racism because you've been at TLU and you're Black, right? So it's those types of things that I don't know that TLU is or was ready to deal with. And so it means I'm gonna stay to the side and I'm gonna use language that can't really be argued against. And I'm gonna make sure that it's like All Lives Matter-esque without actually saying All Lives Matter, so that I don't rock the boat too much. But that's just how what I see when I think about TLU as it was when I was there and where it is right now. I just don't know if folks are ready to take that step. But you have to be if you're going to be committed to it, right? You can't be lukewarm.
Right. What about others of you in terms, Shay just shared a lot there in terms of the institution and responses to this kind of effort. What would you all have to add to that?
I haven't really kept up with, Facebook and social media in regards to TLU and their response to everything. But I would agree with what Shay said about how back in the day, it didn't seem as if TLU was willing to lose the money, as most companies were not. And even today, they're not willing to do it, to let something go, to say, this is our stance on this situation. I did have a lot of professors who I knew that's how they felt about things, and I could talk with them about certain situations, but there was no real push to diversify the faculty, not even just to have more Black professors or adjuncts or anybody, but anybody other than a non-white male. That was the standard. One of my favorite professors left, not solely due to the lack of diversity and the lack of ability to really teach history in the way that he wanted, but that was one of the reasons. He felt stifled in what he could say and in the ways that he could say it in. And he's moved on to and been very successful in moving on to something that allows him to be more truthful in the history that he teaches. So if that's still ongoing, or if that was a one-off, really giving people the avenues and the ability to address issues that they're experiencing. And if money is an issue for recruiting talent, then that's something that needs to be addressed and overcome. That should not put people out of the running. And that's not something that I think is actually an issue. If that was told to Anthony, I call BS on that, because if you're looking for a job and you really want to make change, especially if you're right out of college, you're not going to turn down a position at an institution where you can really set yourself apart and really do some real good. I think more it was they weren't looking for people to diversify their staff. And usually you're not looking for it because you don't have a hiring committee who is not diverse. If you're all white males, or if you're all white people, males and females, you're probably going to look for white people. That's just how it goes. It's a hive mind. You're all thinking the same way. So you're looking for the same thing. You agree with the same things. And so that's where you have to really start, is who are the people doing the hiring? And if you don't yet have a diverse staff, recruit people who maybe don't work for the university, or like somebody who is Demetrius, who's been a regent, put somebody like him on a hiring committee to get some different ideas in and try to think outside of the box on how to get a more diverse staff in here, so we don't have the same thing year after year. And I remember that professor who worked in the basement, really nice guy, and he too felt as if TLU did not do enough to really diversify the staff and support its Black students. And he was approached every year by Black students to be the sponsor for everything. And he couldn't say yes to everybody because nobody has the time for that. There's another professor, Dr. Kosari, who was also the go-to for everything, because she was actually, I think she's still there, a civil rights professor. But two people can't be the voice for everything. So I think really starting with a diverse hiring committee to have diverse ideas, and then also be able to overlook things like names. If you can't say somebody's name, or if you're not interested in learning how to say somebody's name, you may overlook their resume. I'm sure somebody like Chawanna, unfortunately, has experienced that herself, where, I don't know how to say the name, so I don't really want to work with them. So that's where I'm at, is going back to basics, really, on what can we do immediately to implement immediate change, and then go up from there and look at the money issue and how can we really make this a tangible thing on our campus.
I certainly, I really appreciate those comments and observations, because I think you're speaking a truth for sure, that things happen where you use sort of the same practices over and over again, and you don't get any different results, and there's a reason for that. And so exactly. I certainly think that you have to think about the process you're using, think about the people who are part of that process in order to meet the goals that you're looking to meet. And you're certainly all speaking to the critical importance of having people on our faculty and staff who look more like our students. I mean, that is that's obviously very important for all kinds of reasons. And I think it is something that we have worked on, but we clearly have more to do in that. But it's really helpful to hear your perspective on that. Before I shift us to maybe to just a few other things, I just want to make sure I don't miss any other comments in this particular realm. Yeah, go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, so, I hear the language we're using, which is, hire more people of color. and that to some extent, I guess that serves that serves our purpose. But I don't think it's enough to just focus on people of color. I'll share this example. I was at TLU about 5 years ago, right, shortly after I defended my dissertation. And I spoke, about my research, about my experience at TLU, whatever. There were several Black students there in the front, but I noticed I wasn't getting much interaction. I was saying things that were purposefully, right, cheeky, just to see if I could get some type of reaction, and I didn't. And so then I said, okay, well, fine, since you're not going to ask me anything, I'm going to ask you. And so I asked, right, how is the climate now on campus? What are you experiencing, right? Do you still feel like you have to meet in the BSU so that you can have any type of, safety or anything like that? And so anyway, we're leaving, and I had planned to sit with the BSU following my talk, and the professor at the time who was serving as their advisor, he's walking with me, and he was like, man, those questions that you ask, that's usually stuff we talk about behind closed doors. And I looked at him and I'm like, bro, you're useless, right? Because if this is what you're telling these students that they have to do, to talk about their experiences as students on this campus behind closed doors, I said, how are they ever going to impact change, right? I said, how is anybody even aware that y'all even facing these things? I was like, and it's not like they're facing them in isolation. I said, we experienced them when I got there. There were students that experienced it well before I got there. And I was like, so I asked him, I was like, what good are you doing, right, if you are not doing the work as the advisor to communicate with people in your department or perhaps even your administrators, right, to talk about the experiences of these students and what they're sharing with you, because otherwise it's going to perpetuate and you're going to have the same issue. So, I mean, yeah, sure, having more Black faces in the room, right, is nice. And it might be a good recruitment tool, right? Because you can have a person in business and they're like, oh, okay, well, I see a Black person doing business, I'll go do business too. But in terms of the work that we're talking about, which is making sure that we're serving these students, right? There's several Black and Latino faculty that have had no training in anti-racist education. They've had no training in culturally responsive pedagogy. And so they will merely replicate, right, some of these same patterns that you're saying that you want to avoid, right? I worked in the school district here in North Texas for about good 7 months, and that's all I could really stand because I was in a primarily Black district. I had Black administrators, and they saw no problem with that racist Texas history book that I had to teach my 7th grade students. And the reason why they had no problem with this is because they had never received any type of training, right, that would even point to things like bias, right, hegemony, right, theoretical frameworks through which to view racist literature. They had never had any of that knowledge. So for me to bring it up, right, it went completely over their heads. So yeah, I don't think it's nice. Like I said, for the purposes of recruitment, sure, right? Hire somebody Black, hire an Asian woman, sure, because you have people at that school that would need to see that to perhaps be inspired. But if you're trying to move the needle, well, then you got to go a little bit further than the superficial.
Agreed. And that's what I mean by, but you have to be ready for that, right? Because that's a commitment at the university. That's a culture shift. It's a paradigm shift. Like you can't, it would be telling professors that, no, this is not how we're going to teach this now. We're going to make sure that students know this truth, right? There's a lot of truth I learned at TLU that I didn't know before I got to TLU, but it was because I had professors who cared enough and who wanted to make sure that I knew that. Yeah. But as an institution, it has to be a cultural habit. Like everyone has to be on board with that in order to move that needle. Because if it's just individuals, well, what if you don't take any classes in that particular department and you don't get to experience those professors? Well, what happens for you, right? It shouldn't be that you become more enlightened and you become more anti-racist based on your major or based on who your professor was. Like I had a lot of these professors that we've all named, and every single one of them, I talk about them to this day because they were that instrumental in who I became as a woman, as a Black woman, especially. And the irony is like, none of them are Black women. There's Dr. Vincent, who I love, but she was not like one of our professors in our classes. She was in our career services, right?
And she got doctored along the way.
Right. And so that's the piece there. Like, it has to be the entire institution. And that means you're going to come up against people that don't want to see that change, or who don't think that there is a change, right? Who have no problem with that racist Texas history book, or no problem with that, you know, telling kids that they need to speak proper English when proper is not a thing. Like, all of these languages are equally great, right? So I think that's the piece that I'm trying to get to, is like, as a university, you got to be ready for that, because you're going to get the pushback. And if you're not ready for the pushback, well, then you're not ready to be fully anti-racist as an entire organization.
Do y'all remember that conversation we had about vernacular English? And we had people talking about what's proper and what isn't. And then we had a sister who shaved the perm out of her head, and she was wearing a natural. And there was a huge discussion on our campus, and it persisted for several days, simply because we had no paradigm through which to view these various representations of African-American identity, right? Because they just weren't taught. We had, you know, and it's not like these are things that we would have necessarily learned in our homes, right? And so we're trying to perform and construct notions of Blackness on the fly, right? With nothing to inform our decisions.
Yeah, I had Professor Rodriguez for Mexican American cultures in the Southwest, I think it was, and we had to do a book presentation, and we got to choose our books, and so I picked my book, and then he was like, "No, you're not going to do that book. You're going to do Selected Speeches by Milcar Cabral." And I was like, "Well, who is that? I've never heard of that person before." And so I read it. I read this book, and I literally shaved my head like after I finished the book, right? And it was, I still have the book, which I need to pay somebody for. But making me read that book, as opposed to me choosing some other book that I thought would be cool. Him being like, "No, Chawanna, you're going to read this book. I want you to do a presentation on this book," and how much reading that book just woke up a part of me that I did not know existed. But I got that awakening at TLU because of Professor Rodriguez, right? And so then I was trying to like figure out, what does it mean to be Black? Like, what does it mean to be who I am? So I did shave my head, because I'd only ever known a perm my entire life. I was like, I had no idea what my actual hair is like. I'm going to shave my head. And I know I came back to campus one day, and I was like, not bald, but like super short afro. And everybody was like, "Did you and Rob break up?" Because I mean, my husband now was my boyfriend at the time, and Roderick played football. And everyone was like, "Did y'all break up? Like, what's going on? Why is your hair gone?" And it was like, no, I'm trying to figure this thing out. Like, I'm just trying to figure out what it means to be who I am, without European beauty standards, without this puritanical American view of sexuality and gender and all of those things. But yeah, like, I got that at TLU. Like, I didn't come to TLU looking for that, but I got it. And even being in those really bad situations with other folks on campus helped push me in a way that I needed to open up, to really understand like how many things I adopted that were anti-Black, or that I could even be anti-Black, but also be a Black person, right? Like, that was not even something that was in my head. The true definition of racism, like the sociological definition, like none of those things. I knew none of those things before I came to TLU, but I had professors and I had people like Anthony and just other folks who spoke it, and I was listening. And even when we were presented with neoliberal, I'm colorblind, I see all people, blah, 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 that kind of stuff, it still pushed me further to the place that I'm at now. Thank God for Twitter, because I learned a whole lot on there. But again, you want that experience, not just for certain people based on the course they have to take, or based on the major that they choose. You want that for every student, which means that would have to permeate the entire culture of the university.
And I think the entire culture extends beyond just professors as well. So I mean, I think we need minorities in the campus police. I think we need, minorities obviously in admissions in the football program, because there's a lot of systemic issues going on right there. And it goes all the way up to, if the president's cabinet doesn't have any minorities on it, and we're sending people back to school during a pandemic when we know that, COVID-19 disproportionately affects the Black community. It's like, what are we really doing here? So at every level, institution-wide, I think diversity is necessary, not just obviously the professors.
That's a good point.
I want to, you all have each mentioned in some ways what it is you're doing now, but I want to make sure that you each get to say a little bit more about your current work, both your career, but also if you could say a little bit more about your activism. I think all of you have in some ways shared some of that with me and a little bit today, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that as a way of helping our students, our staff, our faculty, our leadership understand the kind of work that you're doing and what we can all learn from that.
I guess I'll start this one because both Stephanie and Anthony have taken part in a project I'm working on with fellow alum Adam Sweeney, who graduated about the same time as Anthony and I. We started a podcast about these very issues, and basically we've been pairing current students. We have 4 current student hosts. I'm Rashad Tolbert, Rihanna Custodio, Brendan Cheney, and John Vitti Johnson. And they've been awesome. And we've been pairing them with different alumni over the past month or so. And we plan to release some episodes of that at the end of next month up until the end of the election cycle in November. So yeah, and Chawanna mentioned earlier, the Facebook posts and the comments that were on there. That was really the catalyst for us starting that project. It's like you see these comments and it's 2020 and you start to get a bit annoyed that things have not progressed the way that they should be progressing. And these are people that are part of a community that I care about. And they're saying things like Chawanna mentioned about, I'm done with TLU and I'm taking my pocketbook with me or something like that. And it's like, if we're going to fix some of these really complicated, expensive to fix systemic issues, we need as many pocketbooks staying at TLU as we can. So, we sort of thought, these probably aren't the type of people to go out and engage the Black community of TLU and start conversations on their own. So why don't we record the conversations and bring the conversations to them, having them do as little work as possible. And so, yeah, our goal is to just kind of educate and empower the community. And so that's what we've been working on.
So my career is in insurance now. I'm a claims adjuster. And even within my own on a daily basis, I see, unfortunately, microaggressions, like Chawanna and Anthony have both mentioned, speaking properly. In my position, I talk to people all day long about what happened in accidents. And if people don't say things the right way, unfortunately, if you have not been taught how to properly work with all types of people, you overlook what people say. You dismiss what people say. You think it's not important. If you don't speak, quote unquote, proper English or act like you have a PhD, then your version of what happened in an accident is given less validity than somebody else's. So even within my insurance career, I see myself as somebody who is working against racism and prejudice on a daily basis. Outside of work, I have gotten really involved in protesting in Dallas. I actually held my own protest outside of City Hall a couple of months ago. I think it was a month and a half or so ago, to call attention to the fact that it's not Washington who decides what happens in Dallas. It's City Hall. And I read a quote, I can't remember his name anymore, but there's a student who went to Berkeley back in the 60s during the free speech days, because there was a time when it was not okay to say what you felt and what you thought. And he was an Italian American at Berkeley, and he was protesting, actually stood on top of a cop car for 30 hours and refused to let the police take a protester. And his speech said, you must throw your body onto the wheels of the system. He's not literally saying, throw yourself on things unless you feel that's what's necessary, but you are onto the wheels of the machine, sorry. So you have to, he's meaning find what the machine is and stop the machine. The machine for every single city and every single town is City Hall. It's the police department. And so since reading his speech and about what he and other Berkeley students did at that time, it's really become a passion of mine to get involved in local politics and help people who don't know how to vote, who don't think that they can vote. A lot of people, think you have to have an address to vote, think, just because you've gone to jail, you can't vote. If you get in line, at 2 minutes before closing, they can kick you out. So really working with not only, social justice or issues around criminal justice, but also voting, because that it all ties together for me. It's all one big circle. Everything works together. And if we don't address one issue in our own communities, then what happens in Washington doesn't matter. If, because we had Obama for 8 years, and cities in America, there's, and everybody says it, COVID has really brought to light the travesties that are still happening. People are still not getting the healthcare that they need. I read an article today that said, of the 300,000 participants needed in 2 studies regarding COVID vaccines, each study has received less than 10% minority participation. That's solely due to minorities, particularly Black people, not wanting the government to put unknown substances into them because of what happened years ago and what continues to happen. So there's a lot of issues within our own community that need to be addressed, and it needs to happen from people who live here, from, you work down the street from, a homeless community, what can you do to help out in your own community? So that's what I'm doing outside of my day job to help out in the Dallas community.
You're muted, sir.
Chawanna, you're on mute.
I always forget this. I am currently the Senior Director of Curriculum and Assessment for a public charter network on the south side of San Antonio. So in my professional life, I design academic programs, develop curriculum, all kinds of stuff, help run Compass Rose Public Schools. We're awesome. It's wonderful, and I love it. So that's what I do. And I love doing that. I love, that is my activism, I feel like, because it's in education, because it's the core piece. Like, I focus on the things that are actually taught in the classrooms, right? Everyone says, oh, I was never taught that in school, or you'll say, I never learned that thing, or that's not how I learned it. Well, that's my job. My job is to make sure that you learn the thing that you weren't taught, that we weren't taught when we were in schools. And that you learn it in a way that teaches all of these different frameworks, and that teaches you how to look at history the right way, or how to make sure that you're analyzing from multiple perspectives, and that you're seeing the bias in the writing, and not just taking it as 100% fact and truth. So that's what I do. And so like my activism, I feel like is that I don't go to the protests, and I don't do those things. I will protest like by not spending money. I'll boycott. Just tell me who I need to boycott in that way. But I do, I serve on a board of a progressive leadership development program here in San Antonio. It's New Leaders Council. We have different chapters all across the nation. And so for 2 years, I served as curriculum chair for that. So we help teach leaders, millennials, but other leaders how to run for office, how to do all kinds of things, work in nonprofit, like just try to make change, how to mobilize and create different organizations and spaces to move this progressive agenda, this anti-racist agenda forward. And so that's the core of what I do. I've really enjoyed doing that. This year, I pulled back from the curriculum part, and I'm a general board member. But we do that here in San Antonio. And then I just like talking to people. I have a lot of conversations with a lot of different people about topics that only seem to be talked about on social media. But I have those actual conversations in life with people off of the internet, because those are the ones that need help understanding it, right? I find in my experiences, either on Twitter or Facebook, really is this language gets used, and it's great. There's like echo chambers all over social media, like, right? All the people you follow are leftists, all the people you follow are whatever. But that doesn't translate all the time to the people who are going to the polls, or to the people who are working in the classrooms, or the people who are working next to each other every day. And so I think it's really important to sit down and have those conversations with folks, and to help them understand, right? And to just get us all moving in the same direction. Because it's easier to get something done when everyone sees that common vision, when everyone sees, yeah, we do need to be here. Even if it means that you might not get the thing you want because you have more privilege. Well, you need to want for the whole, right? We can't keep doing this individualistic kind of thing. Like, it needs to be about the whole. And even if that means I got to pay more, or you got to pay more, or we got to do this, or you can't have that because we got to give it over here. That's what matters. We need to be okay with that, and we need to embrace that, because we all have to get there together. It can't be where just a couple of us make it, and then we think we're the standard when we're really the minute exception, and everybody else is back there. So that's me. That's what I do. I really enjoy it. I love all things K-12 education. I do higher ed stuff too, but mostly K-12 education, and trying to educate parents and teach them how to be advocates for themselves and for their children, and teaching children how to be advocates for themselves. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you.
And
Go ahead, please.
I have spent a majority of my time working in higher ed. I worked at a community college in Massachusetts for 6 years. In addition to teaching classes, I was heavily involved in not only recruitment, but specifically creating initiatives so that we can have increased parental involvement in recruiting. I helped write a grant so that we can get more resources to serve us in that end. I also wrote a portion of a grant that helped to create our supplemental instruction program, right? Something else that I got when I was at TLU that I thought would be beneficial to first generation students, and particularly students of color. I've been heavily involved in advocating for culturally responsive pedagogy in higher ed. It's funny, when I applied for my current position, I had a job at another state university here in North Texas. So I wasn't really worried about, like, oh my God, I might not get this job, right? I knew I was gonna eat. So I was very open with them about my anti-racist education work, my culturally responsive pedagogy work. I was very open with them about my aspirations of, creating more opportunities to increase equity for students, increase access for students. And to my pleasant surprise, they wanted somebody to do exactly that kind of work. So yeah, I got a job. Um, I am involved in some community organizing efforts, but I try to stay behind the scenes. I have a soon-to-be 4-year-old daughter, and I made a deal with her mother that I would not put myself in the line of fire. I had an altercation with a police officer probably about 3 months ago, where in which he was surrounded by several police, and I went to make sure that he wasn't about to get attacked. And then another police officer who was not involved at all came over and threatened to shoot me because I had my hand in my pocket, and he accused me of having a gun. And so anyway, so I had to take this police officer on, and I ended up, just leaving it alone and just filing a complaint, so, it's on the record. But I had to promise my child's mother that I would not involve myself in that type of activism anymore, because I'm a Black man and over 200 pounds. And yeah, so anyway, but I limit my activism to the classroom and to initiatives in higher ed that focus on increased access and increased equity.
I know that I feel like we could talk for a long, long time, but I know I'm going to need to bring this to at least a conclusion for today and for now. I certainly hope that we can stay in conversation. But as I do this, there are a couple of things I want to say in terms of sort of what I've learned today as a beginning, I'll say. I'm hearing each of you talk about both the impact of this institution on your lives and the limits that you encountered at this institution. And you've talked about those in not only very real ways, but ways that clearly are still with you in very real ways. And so I think that's instructive and helpful, useful to me, certainly, and to all of us who are part of the TLU community. I've also heard each of you talk about your individual path. I love the way you each talk about how you found your way to what you're doing, how you've chosen to identify and live your activism in your own way. And I think that's such a great message for our students to recognize that there are different ways and different choices, but what it's very clear to me what you're all doing is figuring out how you're going to have an impact individually, but as Shay said, as a community, recognizing that decisions we make, in any individual decision we make, has to be thought of in terms of that broader community. And then the other big takeaway for me today is just a deep appreciation for your clear-eyed perspective. You offer some very relevant and important critiques of your alma mater, even as you give us ways, I think, to think about how we can continue to work towards change. Recognizing that, I think Anthony said, like it's never just about one thing. It's not going out and doing one thing that's going to make all the difference, but we've got to work on all the things, and we've got to try to move the needle, to use your language, to make this institution better, stronger, to recognize all aspects of our history and our heritage at this institution, where we've fallen short, where we've got an opportunity to grow and to learn. And really, I think, hearkening back to what a lot of what you all have said is being an inspiration for our students, being a place that our students can, while they're here, and then as you all have after they've left, continue to see this as a place that had an impact, even though it was never a perfect place. That was not the experience, but it was a place that was still able to have an impact, and which allows for people like you to continue to have an impact, which I think is really a huge takeaway for everyone today, that your work and your connections to TLU, your connections to one another, the people that you took strength from, are still part of the story that's being told today. So I just want to say a big thank you for what you've allowed me to learn from you all today, and what you've shared. And I want you to know that I'm I'm really eager for this to be shared more broadly so that your insights and perspectives can be a benefit to all of us. And Anthony, I'd love to give you the last word.
Well, I just want to think about, so you're talking to some of the highest achieving students that school has ever had. We knew each other on the ground. We were in the same circle. We benefited greatly from our interactions with each other. But all of us are very well aware of those students that were not as resourceful. They did not stand out academically. They perhaps were shy, they perhaps intimidated. And so, whereas we were much more likely to go out and seek help and seek out resources, they didn't. Whereas we had people who were willing to mentor us and who were willing to pull us underneath their wings and support us and to protect us, they didn't have that. And so, we can all attest to some great things that we experienced at TLU. But that was partially because of our unique experiences as the type of students that we were, and then the type of people we ultimately became. But I'm thinking of several members of, the football team, right, that were recruited alongside me, that, they were there in September, but they were not there in February. And, for those, for many students, particularly coming from the inner city, right, that was their one shot, right? That was the one opportunity they had to do college education. And simply because they didn't have anything to hold them there, right, their potential futures were derailed. And so, like, I'm really thinking about those. You have several students like, Nick, who's the brother I spoke to in my interview?
That was Rashad Tolbert.
Yeah, so Rashad Tolbert's gonna be okay, right? He's the kind of fish that can swim in any pond. I'm not
very bright future.
Yeah, I'm not worried about him, but I know that he goes to class with some students that aren't nearly as bright, who aren't nearly as gifted, but they are human beings with souls that should be taken into consideration. And so I don't want to give any impression that, or allow for the possibility for any impression that, oh, well, they had it great, so then it should be like this for everyone. Our experience is not like that of anybody else's, especially when you think about me and Chawanna and Nick, like just for our class, right? We did so many of the jobs. There just simply weren't other jobs for other people to do, right? We were guide dogs, RAs, student ambassadors, op-ed editors, all of that, right? So that means there's a lot of folks that weren't doing anything because we were doing so much. And I just, like I said, I want, it's important to me that we take those students into consideration because yeah, we're very much success stories, but we would have been successful wherever we went, right? I'm thinking about those people who, for them, TLU was their saving grace. It would have been their last hope. And because they didn't have the resources they needed, right, they floundered.
That's very valid. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Nick. Go ahead.
I was just going to add to that I just hope today leads to obviously more substantial, tangible change, because not a whole lot has changed in the past 20 years. And I don't want to be having the same conversation 20 years from now. It's like, I need specific things past, like, comparative adjectives, like we do more, do better. I need the Black Student Union to have a community center on campus. I need, the diversity officer. I know that's like a popular idea right now. I've talked to like 13 people doing this podcast. Nobody's asking for the diversity officer. That seems like a way to kind of shift blame and responsibility without really giving that person all of the power to do like hiring and the tools to make tangible changes. So yeah, I just hope that we can get past the rhetoric and do some action.
Metrics. I need the metrics. Like,
yes,
where are we today? Where do we want to be 6 months from now?
When we talk about things like finances, we have these very detailed financial reports, but when we talk about diversity, it lacks all of that specificity. And I think that's a huge problem.
I'm a fan of
I-
knowing, like, where are we going to be 6 months from now? Where are we going
Right.
to be a year from
Yeah,
now?
I want to be able to check in 6 months from now and then see, okay, this is what we've done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and
And
I agree with that. And I think for me, you have to have goals. I mean, you're to meet the metrics, you have to have goals. You have to be willing to do things. And if they don't work, if they're not the right things, then you try again and you keep coming at it, And I mean, I certainly realize that anything we do might be open for criticism and might not be the exact right thing, but I'd much rather us be doing things and working for change rather than being afraid to do things because it might not be the right thing. So I think
And it will be criticized. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Whatever you do will be criticized.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for having us today and being a good sport and being vulnerable, and even just having this conversation, I think is definitely in the right direction.
And
Well,
I
it's
would
been
like to say to anybody listening to this, you found this podcast for a reason, whether you're a student, alumni, parent, prospective employee, whatever you may be. I'd like to challenge you to do something. A lot of people are not doing anything simply for the fact that they don't know what to do. I hear a lot these days, I want to help out, I want to protest, or I want to help people to vote, but I don't know what to do. Black people don't know either. Like, I Google stuff. I Google how do you do a protest, and that's how I came across the Berkeley situation. But if you don't start somewhere, you'll never get anywhere. So you not everybody can do everything, but everybody can do something. So just start with something and go from there. You're probably going to mess it up. Everybody messes things up. We fail. You can't fail unless you try. So I challenge everybody listening, at whatever point you find this, to just do something. Find something that really speaks to you, that you feel you can really have impactful change, either immediately or in the long run, but just find something that you can do to make your community better.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That's a really great way to summarize what I think today's conversation is all about. Thanks to each of you. You are a great reminder of what this place can be and is and can strive to be. And I'm so grateful for your time. And I wish each of you the best. And I look forward to staying in touch with you and checking back in to offer some progress reports. So thank you for that. And you all take care.